I read Jeffrey McConney and Deborah Tarasoff's testimony in Donald Trump's New York criminal trial so that you don't have to. They both have official titles. I actually think Jeffrey McConney is like the controller, which is a very serious sounding job title, but essentially they're the accountants. These ones are boring, but important. So we're gonna try and get through it as quickly as possible. First, we learned that the way that the Trump org works is that it's like a whole bunch of different assets, like real estate holdings, restaurant holdings, golf courses, and it's all wrapped up into one thing called the Trump Trust. Jeffrey McConney talks about this experience that he had with Donald Trump where it sounds like he paid bills and then Donald Trump was like, why would you have paid our bills without negotiating? Which I really think is just the prosecution trying to point out that like Donald Trump looks at his accounts and he looks at his bills and he's probably not going to mindlessly send someone $35,000 several times over the course of a year. McConney also talks about the now like infamous scribbled piece of paper where Alan Weisselberg works out how much money Michael Cohen needs to be paid back for paying off Stormy Daniels so that he actually nets the $130,000 that he is owed. So you get $130,000, $50,000 that goes to like some processing company I don't entirely understand, but another entity that was involved in the payment, $60,000 that is an apparent bonus to Cohen, and then tax money so that Cohen actually gets to keep the amounts that he's intended to keep after all of this is paid off, because of course it's not being paid off as a reimbursement, which wouldn't be taxed. It's being paid off as like a retainer or a fee for having him as a lawyer all that time. Anyway, it gets to $420,000. When it's time for McConney to start processing these payments to Cohen, he asks Cohen for an invoice. The prosecution is like, do you need an invoice if you know how much money you're supposed to send him? And then Jeffrey McConney says, a lot of people ask for money. I need an invoice. Like that's standard process. If the Trump org is going to pay someone, they're going to get an invoice. So then Michael Cohen starts sending those invoices, thus creating the paper trail that brings us here today. Now, at the point when all of these payments are happening, Donald Trump has gone to Washington. He's the president and all of his holdings are in this sort of like separate trust. The first $105,000 come out of that trust, and then the rest of the $315,000 that Cohen is owed start to come out of Donald Trump's personal bank account. And then the prosecution goes through all of these invoices, all of the like paper trail of the money being sent to Michael Cohen, because remember, those are the charges. Those are the falsified business records that we're here to talk about. So first the defense is like, Michael Cohen was a lawyer, right? You knew Michael Cohen and you knew he was a lawyer. And McConney's like, sure, yeah. I mean, he said he was a lawyer because of course the defense wants to say that he was being paid for legal services and not hush money. The defense is even like, didn't the signature block that Michael Cohen was using at the time indicate that he was Donald Trump's personal lawyer? And McConney's like, yeah, it did. Because of course it does. If we've learned anything in this trial, it's that Michael Cohen is a committed social climber. The defense also finds like a singular email where Michael Cohen indicates that he might be doing something business related for Donald Trump, which I guess is supposed to justify the $420,000 in payments that he was sent that year. Deborah Tarasoff, whose name I hope I'm saying correctly, just so you guys know, I'm not watching these. You can't watch these. They're not being aired. I'm just reading them. So forgive me if I said her name wrong. Anyway, she's worked at the Trump org for, I think, 24 years. She's still working there. She's got lawyers here, like many of the people who are testifying. The Trump org is paying for those lawyers. The prosecution also has her go through the whole paper trail, very boring, but very important. They ask her about Alan Weisselberg's relationship to Donald Trump. She says the two of them very close. They also go over this whole process of like the checks being FedExed to DC for Donald Trump to sign them so they could go to Michael Cohen, essentially having her highlight the fact that Donald Trump is the only person with the authority to sign his checks. On cross-examination, the defense starts, as actually they've been starting many of these questionings, by saying, we've never met before, right? I think because they want the jury to know that like, even though the Trump org is paying for these people's lawyers, they're different lawyers, and the defense has not prepped them for their testimony. And essentially here, the defense is just trying to distance Deborah Tarasoff from Trump, right? Like, making it clear that there were a few layers of authority between her and Trump, even though Trump does remain everybody's boss. And then they're like, you were just doing your job, right? Like your boss told you to fill these invoices and you filled them, yeah? And she's like, yeah, I was just doing my job. Which no one's saying that she wasn't just fulfilling the requests made of her. The real question here is like, were those requests illegal? And that's it for those two.